to Reading on the Rock.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Covenant United Methodist Church and tonight's edition of Reading on the Rock. I'm Reverend Ann Kemper, and I welcome you to this special time of reading children's stories. And tonight we continue our series of reading books about music. Because music can be a beautiful, fun, and diverse way to express our feelings, including our feelings of praise and thanks to God. So tonight's story is going to take a closer look at the guitar.
Tonight's story is about the guitar, and the book is called Gus and Me, and it's written by Keith Richards. You might know that name because he is a professional musician with the band The Rolling Stones. The art is by his daughter, Theodora Richards, and the book is published by Little Brown. And look here, here's some musical notes that he had to learn how to play. Gus and Me. Theodore Augustus Dupre lived with 7 daughters near the Seven Sisters Road in a house that was filled with instruments and cake. We can get a little peek into the door. There's some of the sisters. There's some cake. Theodore Augustus Dupre could play the piano and scrape the violin, blow the saxophone, and strum the guitar. He had been a soldier, a baker, and the leader of a dance band. But now, Theodore Augustus Dupre was my granddad. Now he was Gus. There was nothing like visiting Gus. The closer to his house I'd get, the bigger my smile would grow. By the time I landed on his doorstep, I was all teeth. Look, he sure is smiling. He's happy to be there, isn't he? He'd be waiting at the front door for me. "Fix the sink, Gus," my grandmother would call out. "Can't do, Emma," Gus would call back. "Keith and I are going for a walk." He'd wink at me and whistle for Mr. Thompson Woofed, and our adventure would begin. I bet the dog's name is Mr. Thompson Woofed. And there's Keith's feet, and there's Gus's feet. They're going for a walk. We'd walk for miles. We'd walk through towns, and we'd walk through the countryside. And Gus, he would hum every step of the way. He'd hum whole symphonies as we strolled from one village to the next. He'd hum funny little tunes as we wandered skinny streets and smoky alleys, marching songs as we tiptoed around foggy ponds and explored silent forests. With Gus, you had no idea where you'd end up. Look, we can follow their path. And here he was humming. One time, he led me all the way up to the top of Primrose Hill to look at the night stars. "Don't know if we can make it home tonight," Gus said. So we slept under a tree on the top of the hill with the skylights above us and the city lights below. Once Gus walked us all the way to London and into the workshop of a big store that sold instruments. "Let's just pop in here. I've got to pick up some strings." "Okay, Gus." Ooh. Inside, it looked like a beehive. Gus lifted me up and sat me on a shelf so that I could see everything. Violins hung from the ceiling by wires. Horns clung to the walls. Men in long brown coats fixed broken instruments and built new ones. I watched as they bent over cellos, trombones, and trumpets. They dabbed at the drums with glue and tapped at them with the tiny hammers. And look, here he is sitting on his shelf watching everything. Men tested the guitar strings, dink-a-plink, dink-a-plink, and the drums, duck, duck, boom, boom, duck, boom. Oh, look at this page. We got to turn it sideways here. My eyes followed a line of guitars that snaked around the room on a conveyor belt. And in the middle of everything, big bubbling buckets of glue went bloop, bloop, bloop. It was magic. I sat on that shelf watching it all. And right then, right there, I fell in love with instruments. When Gus and I got back to his house that day, I took a long look at that guitar that always sat on top of the piano. It seemed more beautiful than ever. All I wanted was to make the strings go dink-a-plink, plink, like the men in the store, but I couldn't reach it. When you're tall enough, you can have a go, Gus said. Every time I visited Gus, I reached for that guitar. Even on my toes, I couldn't touch it. One day, I felt like I was tall enough to grab it, but I didn't even have to try. Gus simply handed it to me. All yours, he said. How do you think he feels about that? Looks like he's pretty happy to have that guitar. He sat with me, taught me how to hold it, strum it, and pluck a little. When you learn how to play Malaguena, he told me, you can play anything. Dink-a-plink, dink-a-plink, dink-a-plink. And I practiced on that beautiful guitar. Look at all the dink-a-plink, dink-a-plink, dink-a-plink. He practiced a lot, didn't he? One day, Gus heard me playing Malaguena, and he nodded. Then he said something I'll never forget. I think you're getting the hang of it. He looks a little older in this picture to me. After that, I took the guitar everywhere. I went to sleep with my arms wrapped around it. And even today, all these years later, I think of Gus. Every time I walk on stage, every time I write a song, every time I reach for a guitar and play a few dink-a-plinks for my own grandchildren, I say to myself, thanks, Granddad. Thanks, Gus. And now here's some pictures of the real Granddad, Gus. And here's a picture of Keith when he was a teenager. And by now he's probably learned how to play the music. And here he is playing as an adult, playing in the Rolling Stones. And now here he is with his own grandson. And look, the grandson is playing the guitar. And that is the story of Gus and Me. In our story this evening, young Keith went with his grandfather to the music store, and he loved looking at the guitars. And so we're going to get to do that tonight. And we have Greg and Tim, both a very important part of our music ministry at Covenant, performing just about every Sunday on guitar and bass guitar. And they're going to talk to us tonight. We are in Greg's studio where he repairs and builds guitars. And Tim is going to talk to us about bass guitars. So thank you both for being here tonight.
Thank you for having us. First thing I'd like to do is discuss, at least with respect to guitar and bass, where they come from. Because as we all know, they don't grow on trees, or actually they do grow on trees. Because as you can see down here, some of the raw wood that it starts out as. And then I'll do things like make the top, which is 2 pieces folded in half, almost like a book. It's called a book match. Mm-hmm. And making into a more solid piece of the right thickness.
Now I'm noticing that the wood, some of the wood is darker and some of the wood is lighter.
That's because I like to use different woods. Just like people have different character, woods have different character too. And I can change the tone of the instrument by using different types of woods. In this case, this is walnut, and this is tulip poplar in the middle. And when they blend, it's a great harmony. Just like people.
I like that.
Getting into shaping those into different types of bodies that I do, and different types of bodies have different characteristics, just like people. This one has a finish on it. This is actually from a tree in my backyard.
Oh, wow.
That's
And now
gonna
they're
be my
starting to
base.
look like guitars a little
Yep.
bit.
And then we go a little bit further over here where some of the work is actually done. Variety of tools. And then to get that shiny finish, I go over here where I have some air can be pulled out, dust can be pulled out, or down into the bin, because you have to be aware of not having any dust on when you're applying a finish. But you can see it looks more and more like a guitar. And then when I go back to the other table, you'll be able to see a completed guitar, as well as one that I'm working on for a customer to make it the way he wants it.
So now you've added the long piece. What's
This
that?
is the neck,
The neck.
this is the fingerboard, and those things are frets that you see between. And as I press down on the string,
I hear the tone.
and you hear the tone change. As the string becomes shorter, the note gets higher. As the string is thicker, the tone is deeper.
And what are the dots for?
The dots help me find my place on the fingerboard.
Oh, okay.
And you can see it's made of many parts. In this case here, looking at, this is called a schematic. There's wires in there, all kinds of wires in there. Understanding the whole guitar and understanding all the processes makes it so that I can develop the kind of sounds that I want to develop on it. The Bible kind of works that way too. That's kind of like your schematic for how to live.
Wow. A lot of comparisons here.
Mm-hmm.
So all these wires, something like that will look like this.
Yes.
So
it
behind
goes.
this little piece of wood is all those wires.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So it looks
now
very
looks
different.
like a
You
guitar.
can see where all these controls will come through here. And just like as I say, this is my recipe to give me what I need to make the kind of sounds that I want to make. And this is just part of it. This is just covers these, doesn't cover the other ones. But having that map to go by gives me direction to be able to get the kind of output that I want to get from it, so that I get the sounds that I want. And just as I say, it's just like having, this is my Bible. Every one of them is different, just like there's different chapters, different books, different parables. It's the same kind of thing with the instrument, and that's kind of what music means to me. Music provides the emotion to the words. Even when you talk, just as I'm speaking now, you hear my voice going up and down. That's because I want to convey a particular feeling, and that's what music does. It conveys feeling to the words.
So we learned about guitars with Greg, and now we see something a little bit different. It looks like a guitar, but it's different. So Tim, tell us about that.
Okay, this is called an electric bass guitar, and
Bass.
it's basically an overgrown guitar. The electric guitar that Greg showed us would be used to establish the rhythm and sometimes be used for lead or the actual melody of a song. This bass would be used to establish more of the rhythm and the pulse, the tempo of the song, establishing the bottom end and giving you more of a gut feel than the higher parts. So it's like the guitar. It has a neck, but it's much longer, and the strings are much heavier. And those two things combine to make a much lower note than the guitar plays. Now, in addition to the bass guitar, I sometimes use the double bass. And as its name implies, it's bigger still. This one happens to be another electric. They make them in acoustic also. But this one, the strings are very long and very heavy, making even lower notes.
So I see you have the frets like Greg had on the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see the dots, but here
They're
I see
hidden.
the dots.
They're over here.
Oh. And here I see dots and no frets.
Yes, this one would be called a fretless instrument, and it's a little trickier to play because where you place your finger has to be very accurate. On the bass guitar, you have the fret, and that's going to establish the length of the string for any given note. Here, it's the placement of your finger. You'll often see a player wiggle their finger around like this. That's called vibrato. And that kind of helps you to hone in on that center of the note and get it right. And it gives it a bigger feel as well. It also, without the frets, it allows you to slide a note in between from one to another, so you can get some interesting effects.
So can we hear a little of those?
Sure. First, the electric bass guitar. If I can get it on here. It's very low.
Yeah.
Until I get up here. I can play higher notes if I choose to. And usually it's one note at a time. Sometimes you play a couple of notes, but usually just one at a time. So the upright, there we go. So that's a much lower note. The amplifier is not really producing the fullness of that low note, but it really does get down there. But you can get that vibrato
There's the vibrato.
and the glissando between notes.
So when you play music at church or wherever you like to play, what does that feel like? What does that do for you? And does it, how does that help you feel closer to God?
Well, first off, it's a really wonderful thing to have music in your life. I find that when I've practiced well and I know the music, it occupies my mind so much that the real world just kind of fades away a little bit. It opens up my heart and it allows me to listen to the message in service more completely. It also, for me, is a chance to provide support to the service. I hope that what I'm doing on the instrument makes the experience more full for everybody else in the congregation.
Okay, and I think it certainly does, because our music ministry is just wonderful at Covenant, and we have so many great musicians, so glad to have you and Greg a part of that.
Our pleasure.
So just one final thing before we end tonight. For any kids who are watching and may want to try a guitar or learn about guitars, just wonder how old were you when you learned to play, and how did you learn to play? So Greg, you want to start?
I was actually a teenager when I always loved music, even as a little baby. You know, it was something that always, made me feel good. And when I heard some of the artists that I've looked to in the past, people like Cat Stevens, Carly Simon, Joni Mitchell, some of those people, I always loved their sound and their music, so I just started out with a 12-string acoustic guitar, which is more difficult to begin with.
Yeah.
Jump in the
but-
deep end.
Yeah, I'm not afraid of a challenge. I always like the challenge. But it inspired me to have that sound to be able to play more. And then, of course, with Tim's encouragement, he got me into woods to begin with when he suggested I go to a local store to look at some different woods. And that wood inspired me to build guitars. Because it was just so beautiful. And people tell me what kind of artwork I do, and I always have to tell them I just shape it. God did the real art because He created those beautiful woods and those beautiful patterns. I just worked with them.
And Tim, how about you?
Well, I started with guitar when I was probably in junior high or something like that. My sister was taking guitar lessons and would show me what she was learning. It wasn't cool for my group of friends to be involved in music, so I kind of had to keep it on the hush-hush. When I went to college, however, I had roommates who were very much into music, and one of them in particular played bass and would leave his absolutely gorgeous bass laying around and did not mind when I picked it up to plunk away on it. I'm sure it sounded awful. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, but somehow that instrument felt right. And later on, when I started my adult life, I found a bass guitar at a garage sale, and there was no looking back. I've been self-mistaught ever since.
Well, we're glad you're cool now, Tim.
Yeah, just like life itself, you have to practice if you want to become good at it. And it's the same thing with our Christianity and with our walk in life. It takes practice, it takes rehearsal, and that's not work. That's fun. So
There you go.
I think that's a way that you can approach it. And I've never heard a grown-up ever say, "Boy, am I sorry I learned how to play that instrument."
Ah, wow. So kids, it's worth learning how to play an instrument. If you are interested in guitars, you could certainly talk to your teacher at school or see if there's someone who has a guitar, like little Keith in the story. Maybe you just want to pick one up and try something. So if you play or if you'd like to learn how to play, leave us a note in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again, Greg and Tim.
Thank
You're
you for
welcome.
having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim and Greg, about teaching us about the guitar. I learned a lot. And thank you, Rebecca, for reading that story. Would you please pray with me? Thank you, God, for giving us the gift of music as a way to share our feelings and to praise and thank you. Amen. And from all of us here at Covenant United Methodist Church, good night.
Reading on the Rock is presented by Covenant United Methodist Church in Rochester, New York.